Hey guys, Saf here with another Raid Shadow Legends video. This week we're going to be doing our regularly scheduled unofficial patch notes for 5.0. Now this has taken me a little bit longer to pull together just because of the size of the patch in terms of lots of little things they changed. Didn't really make a big difference, but I still had to go through the data. And we've also had the fusion, so I thought I'll do all of it in one go, the fusion and 5.0 patch notes. So we're going to be covering obviously the Hydra changes. We're going to be covering any other things in the background that have been changed, champion changes and things like that. So a disclaimer I make with every patch notes video is there are two parts to the video. The first part I'll be covering the official release notes from Plarium, and then the second part is going through the Datamined content to actually determine any changes that have been made that aren't in the patch notes, and also to clarify some of the abstract ways that they put in their patch notes, what they've changed. Now, the second part is obviously unofficial from Plarium, so whilst it is from the game code, it is accurate from that sense. It does have that disclaimer that, it's not been released by Plarium, so take it as you will. So, let's look through the patch notes. Now, I'm not going to cover in too much detail all of the text that they've covered here from Hydra. I think people have read it. I will have some details on some of the mechanics that Hydra does in the unofficial parts, but I won't cover the actual, how you fight the Hydra and all that kind of stuff. I have done a preview video of Hydra where I think most of the stuff that I predicted or assumed has been correct. I think some of the elements in terms of priority of which head you should kill has changed based on the fact that Mischief is an absolute horror of a head. I will probably be doing a follow-up to that video once the dust is settled, once deterrence has been bug fixed and a couple of the other things. So in terms of rotations, right now there are 2 in the data source. They have been updated and added to the Raid Stages tool, where you can find all the stats of all the heads on all the difficulties. For the first rotation, we've obviously got 2 of the heads not in them, and I think it changes similarly. It looks like Mischief is always going to be part of it, which is a real pain in the backside. Weekly cycles, fairly obvious. I think everyone's got their first chest and started towards getting Mithrala. In terms of the rewards, I have done a video last week on the specific rewards, so if you haven't checked that out, please go and do that. I'll put a link in the description to that video. That'll cover everything in terms of the odds from each chest and how long it's going to take you to get Mithrala, what's the outcome of the artifacts and things like that. I have seen some of the end game accounts, some of their screenshots of like full built stone skin from one set, but I think it's going to still take some time for people to get some decent stone skin and protection artifacts. Mithrala Lifebane gets added in this patch. Very, very powerful. I have got her multipliers that we'll cover in the unofficial part. Everyone should be working towards getting Mithrala. She is a monster of a champion in many aspects of the game, being able to buff and protect and carry your team. So these are some of the changes. The first one is Inquisitor Shamael. Now, this probably feels a bit dated, this change, because of all the things that have happened with Shamael, deterrence, and Hydra, and the cheese strategy. But this kind of tells me that they already knew in Plarium that there was something potentially broken about Inquisitor Shamael. And they basically made it so that Shamael would only work on his own. And it's not like that's that surprising. Many champions where they have this type of ability, we're thinking like Brogni's shield, they do have this criteria that only one of them will work in one team. They've also added immunity to petrification, the new debuff that Mithrala does, to a bunch of skills and masteries. I have the full list in the unofficial patch notes we will go through. Weaken debuffs and strengthen debuffs now affect bomb. This is huge. This is massive. Not only is strengthen being able to reduce the bomb debuffs going to be big for an arena meta if bombs do become a thing with stone skin. Those kind of things need to all fall in line. If stone skin becomes dominant and then you start bringing strengthen up in terms of priority, because the only way you can kill stone skin is with bombs, so therefore it's kind of a way to mitigate that a little bit. But weaken now opens up some more opportunities for us to use bombs in general. Rian the Conjurer potentially rises in priority considering she can buff strip and apply weaken. That's like the alternative to Ceres normally. So if you're running something like a Lord Shazar nuke strategy in Arena, then a Rian the Conjurer with Lord Shazar, although you may not be able to strip the stone skin, will still do damage to the stone skin. It'll get rid of all the other block debuffs, and then your bombs are now hitting 25% harder. This change makes bombs significantly better. It still isn't enough to make bombs a viable meta in my opinion, unless stone skin becomes dominant, and I have reservations about that. maybe in the future we can get some bomb champions that are actually defense based, or maybe they'll change the bomb debuff in itself. But effectively having to constantly provide bombs with a bonus damage multiplier tells you that there's a problem with the underlying system. And then we've got reduced attackable area on chat icons. That's just a UI. And of course, they've obviously reduced the silver cost reduction for swapping gear. I would have liked this to have been more universal and longer. So instead of just swapping gear, but also maybe upgrading gear, and also maybe for a month, because it's going to take players a long time to build 3 separate Hydra teams and swap gear around and test things. It's just it doesn't feel like enough really for me. Maybe even potentially they should have just had it so that you could swap gear for free for like a week or two. Just because it's such, like, you can burn through silver so quickly messing around with Hydra. So that's the end of the official part. Obviously, there was more detail in the highlights that they released in terms of what all the different buffs and debuffs and effects do. I'm going to cover some of the specifics in the unofficial patch notes, but check out the highlights if you want that. Just before I get into the 5.0 unofficial patch notes, there is one thing I need to correct myself on, and that is Crimson Helm. A couple of videos ago, I did a video on Bommal changes in the bug fix, and I came out with a statement that Crimson Helm would not be able to solo Bommal. So, whilst the math that I did was probably quite accurate, what I didn't really add enough value to is the strength of her being weak affinity, and therefore, if you factor in the odds of you maybe weak hitting 33% of the time, and therefore you don't get the HP burn or you don't get the bomb, that extra saved damage is probably critical in terms of the regen. And so therefore I actually got that one wrong, but I'm quite happy I got it wrong in that sense, because it basically means that people can still have a viable strategy for soloing Bommal if they don't have, say, multiple bomb champions or the resistance gear. And I'm not one to sit here and say, you know, well, I was right even though I was right kind of situation. I was wrong, got it wrong, but I'm glad I got it wrong. So if you've managed to get Bommal done, congratulations, I'm really happy. However, I think it's one of those situations, I think if she was not strong affinity, it would fail, because obviously she's going to get that consistent damage. So the affinity just goes to show is actually kind of still massive in this game. If you've got a strong affinity, weak affinity, it can make a big difference. There is one thing I want to cover that isn't technically data mined information, but is relevant. There was a Reddit thread that came up using some data that had been generated from a Russian crowdsourced style bot, and he got a lot of data, to be fair, and the conclusions were that there was an increased chance that epic books were coming out of the Clan Boss chests, and his assumption was that people were doing an A/B test. Effectively, if you were in a certain category of people or accounts or a server or something of that nature, you were getting an increased chance. Now, in my initial reaction was, this is just another tinfoil hat theory, which, to be fair, most of them have been proven wrong in the past, and you just got unlucky. However, once we got access to the actual data, because initially we didn't have access to it, I was working with Senti, and Senti was doing most of the math, to be fair, in terms of verifying the data to see if there was actually anything there. And whilst it's, in my book, I'm still not comfortable enough to say, yes, 100% the thing has changed, just because it's crowdsourced data. So whenever you ask people to submit data, unless you're doing it in a way that is so reliable you can trust it, and you've got all your parameters, you always run the risk of someone just inputting data wrong or just typos and different things like that. We have cleansed a little bit, and it seems to be reasonably accurate. However, I do have to put that disclaimer on it. But it seems to be as around the 17th of November, something has changed in the odds. Now, the data mine hasn't changed. The odds that are being put in static in the stuff that we get out hasn't changed. However, the data does correlate. So we're just going to have a look and see, you know, is there something logical that could explain it? So the first thing I wanted to check was, did something happen around the date that they are suspecting? And we can see here, Green Knight posted on the 16th of November that there would be downtime after the chests had been given out to people. So this was after reset time, which means the next reset would be the 17th. So if the hypothesis that something changed on the 17th, well, there was a server maintenance on the 16th, which would result in something changing. So that's kind of like a tick to say, okay, something could have changed. So the next thing I've got here is graphs that Senti has put together, math guru. I work a lot with him in terms of like clarifying some mathematical changes and things like that. And what he was basically doing is looking at the data, cleansed it, and kind of having a look at seeing the difference between the days before the 17th of November and after. So here we've got like legendary tomes. We can see they look pretty consistent. There's no differences. And in sacred shards, again, obviously you'll have variation and deviation just by pure probability and odds. Some months you can high roll, some months you can low roll, right? But what we're looking at is a significant sample of data. I think it's around about several thousand chests of data. And we can see that they are kind of falling on the trend here. And again, this is ancient shards. You can see it's falling on the trend, although if you notice it is dropping down a little bit here. So the idea of this chart is you can kind of see how many sort of items you're getting, and if there was a significant difference in the visual, then you know something's off. So here we can see that there's a little bit more bulk load down the bottom, which suggests that the ancient shards is lower. Now if we look at epic books, this is where it's glaringly obvious something is weird, in the sense that yes, you have a bulk here, but you also have a bulk of people getting a lot more than they were getting last month. So all this data at the top, that suggests that there's a bunch of people that are getting significantly more epic books than usual. And when we look at another view, or we kind of look at it over time, you can see the cutoff line here is the 17th, and all of a sudden the epic book is jumping and the ancient shards are dropping down a little bit. Not significantly, but enough for us to kind of go, okay, it's almost as if epic books are gone up, ancient shards have gone down, and then you've got a little bit of a drop off in void shards. But that is not enough, I would say, there to suggest something's off. But there's clearly something going on with epic books. So I don't know. I haven't got enough information right now to say with categorical evidence that something is going on. But I trust Senti's math more than I trust anything else in the game. If he's suggesting that the data that has been provided by this bot is accurate, the author obviously is pretty confident in his own data, then I would suggest that potentially something is going on, and maybe we need to make some noise about it to see whether something has changed without us telling us. The question obviously is, do we want more epic books over ancient shards? That's subjective. I would guess lots of endgame players would say no. Lots of mid-game players might say, yeah, I'll take epic tomes because I pick up ancient shards all over the place. But it does look like that is something going on. So I'm going to leave it like that. I'm not going to go into any more detail because I actually don't have enough evidence myself. And I am looking at different ways we can collect evidence in a sort of more computerized manner. Hydra Boss multipliers. This is the first part of the unofficial patch notes. So I have looked at all the boss skills to see which... how hard the heads hit and various different things. So this is all based on the current data that's in the game. They might release different versions of the Hydra heads in the future where they do different things, but I doubt it highly. They normally just put different configurations rather than different hero champion configurations. So we can see there is a trend across all of the heads where it is about 3 times their attack. And then obviously there is variation with the Torment where he'll have a multiplier based on the debuffs that are on you. And I've put at the end here how much the decapitation effect of the Wrath head does. So obviously when you kill the Wrath head, it does damage to all of the Hydra heads that are active. That's 5 times attack of the Hydra head. And then if he dies with Vengeance, it's 10 times. So it's a pretty chunky hit. And then what I've done at the bottom table here is I've kind of done an assessment based on normal rotation to see, okay, we've got the multipliers, we've got the AoE, which head is the most damaging head? Turns out even though Wrath is actually the most damaging head because of his Vengeance buff, he actually hits the weakest and outside the Suffering. The one that hits the hardest is Torment, and obviously we need to take into effect that some heads do AoE and some don't. So the Decay being at 19,000 as a single target, that's relatively low damage profile. Suffering being a 16,000 AoE, the weakest of all the skills, is also relatively low damage profile. The Blight head and the Torment head, specifically the Blight head, is probably the highest damage profile because it's the highest damage hit, he's got the most attack, and he has a double AoE. So yeah, so that's just a summary of the multipliers. Obviously decreased attack will help significantly against this fight, and there are also other mechanics that you need to pay attention to. But just in terms of almost like which head hits the hardest, it kind of goes Torment, probably Blight or Torment, then Wrath, then you've got the single target, Mischief, Decay, and then Suffering. The next mechanic that I have pulled out of the game is the respawn rates of the Hydra head. So obviously when you kill a Hydra head, it becomes decapitated for 2 turns, and then it returns with either the same head or one of the other heads that are not in rotation at the time. The way they've set this up is the greater the difficulty, the less chance you return the same head. Now, obviously for the cheese strategy, getting your Torment head back is kind of important. So at normal, you have a 75% chance that you get the same head back. That's why when you're fighting normal, you probably feel like you only ever see the same 4 and you can re-roll to avoid wrath. When you get to hard, it drops quite a lot to 40%. Brutal becomes 25%, and then Nightmare, you've only got a 10% chance to return the same head. So the Mark of the Hydra, I'm still doing some testing on. However, some things I can confirm are the damage release mechanic. So in order for you to get your champion back after it's been digested, you need to do a certain amount of damage. As with the head respawn rate, greater difficulty, more damage you need to do. So it starts off on normal at 200,000, hard becomes 300, and then brutal and nightmare share the same amount, which is 400,000 to release the champion. Now, I didn't appreciate the fact that Player thought it was a great idea to put the mischief head as the one that is coded to always get the consumption on the first rotation unless you slow it down. That was very clever by them. As a result, most of us were probably AoEing to try and do enough damage, which on normal you're probably going to be able to do, a combination of HP burn, AoEs, or other things like that. However, on Nightmare at 400,000, you're going to need to bring some sort of serious single target nukage, specifically ignore defense champions that are really powerful, someone like Traxa, someone like Little Miss Annie, people who can get through the high defense numbers. So it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves. Some people have found a trick to let the marked champion die and then another champion will get marked instead and you can kind of revive them. But these are the numbers you need to unlock them from being digested. So, Mark of the Hydra, how does it work? So 100% the first mark that gets placed on you at the start of battle will go on the champion with the highest critical damage stat. Now, I'm not sure right now who gets the second mark or the third mark or what that criteria is. I need to do more testing. But that first mark is always the case, always is the one with the highest crit damage. The champion then can't be remarked until 2 other marks have been placed. So it's almost like an internal cooldown on every champion. Hopefully we'll be able to get to a position where we can almost program where the mark goes. So we know it'll go on the first one, you could make that champion die instantly. The second and third and fourth, I need more time to figure it out. So let's talk about some of the new buffs and debuffs that have been added to the game. So the first thing we're going to look at is Stone Skin, which gets applied by the Stone Skin set. So as they said in the description, Stone Skill will cleanse any debuffs on you, and it will also grant debuff immunity. Now the whole cleansing bit is a bit silly on a set, because obviously the set is going to apply as soon as you go into battle. So I'm not entirely sure how that works. Maybe once someone's put it on and they can test it, they can let me know if it actually has an intrinsic difference. But right now the grant debuff immunity is quite powerful. Obviously there is a 50% chance of that buff being protected when you have the set, which means it can't be removed or reduced, but you can reduce the duration of the protected buff. That's what I seem to understand from the game code. You can't remove it, you can't steal it, but you can reduce its duration. Incoming damage is then set to 15% of its usual amount. So it basically means if someone's under Stone Skin, you cannot do damage to them, except if you've got bombs. Bombs are multiplied by a value of 3, so it's 300% more. If you manage to deal 50% of the target's HP, the buff is disabled. Now, there was a bit of a weird wording in the way they said it would reset. It doesn't reset from what I understand of the code. It sets basically almost like Stone Skill as a HP value of 50% of the target's HP. So that basically really is kind of huge on someone like Isuga, who already has significant HP. You're given a lot of effective HP with this set. But that's how the Stone Skin buff works. So Life Barrier, whilst it's not a buff that any champion has at the moment, there are some significant things in the Datamined that wasn't necessarily publicly made aware. The way that Life Barrier works is it is considered a shield, essentially, that goes above any other shield and any other HP. So it's the first thing that gets depleted. As a result, there are some abilities that are based on a shield that does apply to Life Barrier. And this might actually factor into your Hydra decision making. First one is Yannika's Elven Judgment A3 ability. For those who don't know what that does, the idea is it's meant to remove the buff, and then it multiplies the damage that she does based on the amount of shields she removed. So she doesn't ignore the shield to start with, which she does on normal shields. She doesn't ignore the life barrier. She won't remove the life barrier, but what she will do is she will multiply her damage on that ability by the value of the life barrier of 15%. Now on Nightmare, that's huge. I mean, you're talking the Torment head's about 4.4 or 3.5 million HP, something of that nature. And the life barrier is effectively about 20% of the target's HP. So that means she's going to get somewhere in the region of about 105,000 bonus damage on that Elven Judgment, which is huge, considering she's AoE as well, and that ability that can really help in terms of digestion. So if you haven't been getting your Yannicka from the clan shop, I highly recommend you do, because when you get it to the higher difficulties, she might be a significant damage dealer on that A3, especially if you can get her in reflex and get her going quicker. Valor is also another one that has impact with life barrier. So basically the same effects that work on a shield will also work if there's a life barrier. And also Little Miss Annie will ignore defense, under shield, and life barrier. So it's only those 3 champions that seem to be impacted by this change, but they do work with life barrier. So they could be optimal champions for dealing with Hydra, trying to kill through that life barrier. I have checked the Mastery Shield Breaker. That doesn't apply to life barrier. Only shields those. So it's these 3 champions only. And finally, Petrification. There's really not much to cover here. It is as it says it is. It'll remove any buffs. It'll block future buffs. So you basically got a buff cleanse and a block buffs in one. It will also be a stun effect in the sense that you don't take turns. The skills don't cool down. I suppose as a result of that, you also then can't do as much damage to that target. So the incoming damage is set to 40% instead of 100%. It's kind of like a reverse Stone Skin in the sense that, yes, it disables the enemy champion, which might be fine if you're not interested in killing it straight away. However, you will then need bombs to kind of kill it unless you've got extremely high damage or it's an extremely squishy champion, because 60% is a big loss of damage. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Obviously, the only champion that can do it right now is Mithrala when people get her. But I wonder if they'll add more of these effects and things like buff spread that they've been adding into the game. Maybe even life barrier. That'll be very interesting to see if they add a life barrier. Again, going back to the life barrier question, Yannicka's Elven Judgment, she gets both on her ability. So imagine if you have a shield and a life barrier on a target, she gets 15% of both as additional damage. That really pushes her up in terms of potential if they don't change that code. That's what it does at the moment. It's a both. They've made it so that because life barrier is only applied by one Hydra boss, there is no need to make it conditional. But it could be that they forget to change that, and in the future, if there is a life barrier champion with a shield, Yannicka could be doing some silly numbers. They've obviously updated a bunch of skills, and here is the full list of skills that I have been able to identify that they have changed. So Gerhard the Stone A3, where he's got a bunch of immunities, he is also immune to petrification. Hotatsu's passive also applies. Lurus the Proud A2's passive, where it makes him immune to all the other effects, he's also immune to petrification. And I can never say this champion's name, Tiramicia, that passive where if a HP burn is out, she's immune to everything. That is also immune to petrification. In addition, we've got a bunch of skills that are compatible. So Lydia the Death Siren will counterattack when petrification is placed. Gory will counterattack when petrification is placed. Robar will gain bonus damage. Skimfoss on his A2, where he transfers debuffs, but not all the debuffs, he won't transfer petrification. That's one that he will keep. And Vasilf's A2 will extra hit on any champions under petrification. So it's that kind of linear thing of if they kind of did it with hard CC before, they'll continue to do it with petrification now. In addition, we have some masteries that are also compatible with petrification. Opportunist, where you gain 12% more damage, works with petrification. Mighty Endurance and Wisdom of Battle in the defense tree also are compatible. And finally, Deterrence will counterattack with petrification being applied. Now obviously we know Deterrence is about to receive a 1-turn cooldown, which is probably going to make it even less of a valuable mastery than it was before. However, it is still good that they've considered these masteries and updated them to be current. Finally, 2 boss passive skills that also include petrification now. Any boss with Almighty immunity will also be immune to petrification, and the Kuldath passive Invincible Scales, which I think is his version of Almighty immunity, that also has petrification. So we won't really see any sort of PvE usage on bosses for petrification. However, we will see it for arena and sort of wave content. Now we get on to the stuff that I delayed this patch for, which is going through the new champions. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of the multipliers for each champion and how we've graded them on the Hellhades website. As always, you can go to the champion guides on the page and see all the multipliers and the grading on any champion page. I will be doing an update to the spreadsheet that's on the tier list in the next couple of days, kind of refactoring it for all the different things, and we've kind of just checked that the grading still makes sense when we've added all these new champions and new abilities in the game. Castigator, obviously his big ticket thing is his A2, where he does the heal plus equalize HP. Very, very powerful ability. So we're not really expecting him to do damage here, but he's got a great base HP at 18,990 for a rare that's really strong, and a decent speed of 95. Nothing crazy. You're not going to use him for damage, but if you want someone who is going to heal you through faction wars and going to provoke on that A1, he is brilliant for it. Probably one of the best rares they've added in a very long time. Itinerant, I can never say this name, joins the Shadowkin, rare, very, very slow base speed. Awful base speed. Even for a rare, 90 is like almost impossible to use him. Good base attack, and pretty good, I would say, for a rare, good multipliers. I mean, we're talking that A3 can do a bit of damage. Would you use him as an endgame, mid-game, endgame or late game? Absolutely not. Mid-game, maybe. You might 50 him to do some damage, but the A2 is a nice AoE. It's not nothing crazy, but, you know, it's a filler for the faction, I guess. Misericord, better base speed, 98. That's more like it. You can use that. 1,365 is a good base attack for a rare. Really good. Now, her A2 actually smacks quite hard. She's on par with Kale in terms of a nuke. In terms of not quite Kale, but just below it. So if you needed a rare nuker for Bannerlords for whatever reason, she could do it. And she double hit A1 as well. Pretty decent damage. Doesn't really do anything else. Now, the nice thing about that A2 is it will give her turn meter back, so she can rotate a bit faster. But yeah, it's a rare. I mean, for mid-game accounts, again, if you wanted an alternative to Kale as a nuker, you could 60 her and use her. Finally, the last one to talk about is a special case one here. It is a rare bomb champion. Now, good, really good base speed of 100 for a rare. That's great. Base attack 1,321. Now, keeping him alive like every bomb champion is going to be the hardest part, because you need attack to make the bomb work, and therefore he is always going to be squishy. He's a solid build for a rare at this position. So his A1 is nothing special. It's a 3.3 attack. However, it's a freeze on an A1 with a 25% chance, and you don't need books to increase that. So from a Bommal perspective, if you don't have the Whirlims, you don't have a Shiramani, you don't have Ninja, or you don't have those types of champions that you can manual with, he is potentially an option to try and help freeze those side bombs if that's the strategy you're going for. Add in the fact he's also got a bomb as well. He will bring damage naturally. Now, you can go two options. You can either go full glass cannon, maximum attack with a reviver, and just try and get high bomb damage out and hope you can get a freeze on some of the dread bombs to keep your team alive and just revive him then. Or you can go super tank and just make him really tanky. The bomb damage will be lower. It'll still obviously gain from the Bommal's passive, and it'll be a decent additional damage source, probably more than Warmaster will ever do. And then he can just survive, hopefully, and keep freezing the side bombs. The dread bombs, if you get one freeze on one of those dread bombs, it makes a big difference. So I think him, especially with the new fusion, is kind of like a Bommal starter pack for the non-solo, non-full, like double Vrask, triple Vogoth strategy. His bomb multipliers are the same as his attack on that AoE, 4 times, which is solid. It's an average damage ability, but when you factor in the bomb as well, it's probably a bit higher than that. We obviously don't factor in the effects into the damage ratings. We just take in the actual skill damage and all the ignore defense mechanics and stuff. But if you were to combine the both two on Bommal, he'd be very good for that AoE damage. The only downside is he doesn't apply the bomb 100%. But yeah, Ordinator, I think, is a very good rare addition to the game. Gives you an option in Bommal that maybe you didn't have before. So the first of the epics is Broodlord. He is defense based, and there's quite a lot of defense based champions in this. Good base speed of 99, double hit on the A1 of 1.6, and then a good, really strong multiplier for the A3, the AoE, with 3.8, and that is a strong AoE ability. Paired with the fact it also stuns as well if you have a decreased speed out. He is basically going to work very well with a partner, someone like Mother Sibel, someone like Sylar, someone like Vizix, who can apply the AoE decrease speed for him, so you don't have to rely on the passive mechanics, and then his entire kit becomes much better. 90% chance to stun on an AoE on a defense-based champion is rare. I don't think there is one that is at that high. I know there's 2 attack-based with Astralon and Basilius Roanus, but no one on a defense base. So he's not exactly gonna be your, like, wow, he's so amazing, but I think the multipliers here are very strong, very good base defense, very good speed, tanky, can apply some single target buffs. Now that's very important for Mischief. If you want to run a high resist single target champion, well, he will always probably, if the mechanics work the same way as every other single target buff, target the leader, which means if you put your leader in high resistance, he will give them those extra buffs, which mean the Mischief head will go for that champion over your others, as long as the others don't have more buffs. So he's a good option. Masamoto, his A2 AoE is strong, but it's not breaking any boundaries for an epic. I know he's defense based. He's not as good as the fusion in terms of nuking power. His defense is 1365. It's decent speed. He is good in the sense that he adds another champion to the game that can do an AoE increased speed and increased defense, or increased turn meter and increased defense buff. But it's not stronger than Doomscreech, which we've already got, which is a rare. So he's probably a tankier version than Doomscreech, I guess, but it's less turn meter. He's decent, nothing to shout out about. It's not going to break a game or anything like that, but it's a good AoE with a turn meter fill. So yeah, it's not terrible. Umetogi has a significantly high base attack for an epic, in my opinion. 1564, that is really high. You're talking a lot of, like, I think Trunder's is 1609 off the top of my head, so it's really quite high. Good base speed, and she is designed to be the DPS dealer. She's single target, but she does have a lot of built-in innate tankiness, for a better word, being able to mitigate damage, counterattack with the A1. You could put her in some sort of lifesteal or healing set to keep her alive. And she also veils herself and stuff like that. So she's got a lot of built-in mechanics to try and keep herself alive. Her damage numbers are very good. A1 is a godlike ability. A2 is a strong ability. Double hitter as well, which is nice. Obviously, you've got to be careful of resurgent procs or anything like that with a double hitter. I wouldn't recommend using her in arena. I don't think she can be doing that. However, as a single target damage dealer, maybe in Faction Wars that's coming up, yeah, solid. It's a very strong damage. Not bad. My personal favourite of all the epics is Visionary. I think this is such a well-designed champion. Now, a lot of people will sit here and say, oh, it doesn't do any powerful debuffs, doesn't do decreased attack, decreased defense, weaken. It does decrease crit rate, and that is such an undervalued debuff in this game. If you have decreased crit rate out, your champions will never get crit, and that's a big difference in damage. The way that they scale stages is they add more attack, more defense, and more HP to enemies. Because they make so much addition to the attack value, for example, if that crits, because they've got so much raw stat, the crit is actually quite a lot. If you can eliminate crits, you can neutralize damage, and you can manage the situation much easier. It's a bit weird she has decreased crit damage debuff as well, because if you put the decreased crit rate out, I suppose it works for PvP, but for PvE that debuff doesn't do anything, because if they can't crit, they don't really need the crit damage. So I personally think the fact that her entire kit supports herself, you know, she can steal the turn meter if the debuff's out, she places it herself, but then she also gives you turn meter and the buffs as the same kind of debuffs as buffs to your team. It lowers the stat weight of your entire team, and she's got a dungeon aura of speed at 24%. She is a classic support dungeon carry that will just help power you through. Imagine basically an epic Skartosis, which is kind of a shame because Skartosis then means he's kind of useless. She is not designed to be a damage dealer. 98 base speed, very good for an epic, decent. You can use that. 1277 is low, 3.2 and 3.3. Don't look at these numbers and think, oh, well, that's disappointing. She is a very good. If I pulled her in a mid-game account, she'd be going to every single one of my dungeon teams straight away. Just because it's priority buffs, I can run champions with less crit rate, and I can basically make sure I never get crit. So onto the fusion. Now, obviously there's lots of content creators done some videos. You probably might already know the multipliers, but I'll just cover it here. Very good base defense, also very great base HP. 20,000 is really high. Good base speed of 102. A1, 3.8 defense. That is strong for a single target A1. And the A3 is 4.2 times defense, and that is strong. Now, a lot of people said he hits really hard. I made an error. I gave the wrong information to Hellhades. I basically left weaken on, so he was doing 25% more than others. He basically does the same amount of damage as Iggy, Ignatius, or Drexar Blood Twin, which is still a top 5 defense-based nuker. The problem is defense-based nukers, unless you're soulless, are always a little bit lower than every other AoE nuker. So that's why he's strong, not godlike. But the value he does is he'll get a shield based on the damage he does, and then he veils everyone. So if you do get that A3 off, then he might not kill everyone, but the only thing that the enemy can do is attack the lion. And if they attack the lion, they might get frozen, or they need to buff strip. So you see how he kind of becomes annoying, even though he might not necessarily be the highest defense-based nuker. Playtests, there's plenty of YouTube videos out there now. He is 100% probably the best fusion they've done since Brogni. Should you get him 100%, he is so good in so many. You can use him everywhere, and you can use him in niche scenarios, specific scenarios, or you can use him generally. You could probably even use him in Clan Boss if you wanted to. He's so strong. Glisea Soul Guide. I keep wanting to call her Gilsea for some reason. Very strong base defense. Now, when we saw this base defense, we assumed that she would hit really hard. Unfortunately, the multipliers kind of let her down. She's got great base speed, but at a 3.3 A2, which is the AoE, it's not really going to break anyone down enough. And then she doesn't have enough in her kit. You know, she's not like Tatura where she then forces the enemy on her. It's nice, it's good. Her kit is really strong. It's designed to be anti-warlord, but I think a lot of the endgame PvPers are a bit questionable as to whether or not she actually does anything for that. I'm not experienced enough in doing enough plat runs to know it, but I'll take their guidance and say, well attempted at trying to be a counter for Warlord, but maybe has missed the mark. But otherwise, she's still a very good champion for your team, just because she can help keep them alive and control the enemy, and she will still do a fair amount of damage. Finally, I think we've got 2 more to go. Chagor is the Void legendary that will fuse into or empower into Ramantu, although anyone who empowers him into Ramantu is losing their mind because he is so good. 1542 base attack, Void affinity, 100 speed, great. That's really good position for a champion to start with. And then he has got a strong and average. Now I've rated the A3 as average just because it's a random hit. If it hits the same target, it's probably going to be much higher than that. It could even be towards the godlike range, but because it's random, you can't guarantee. So the average is based on it hitting one target. 3.5 attack, 1.9 times 2 on the A2. But his passive is what makes it work. Every time someone takes poison damage from him, has to be his poison, he'll go and he'll attack them on the A1. That places a sleep on them. Hellhades did it on the test server. He can basically just run amok and solo content. You put him with Dark Hail maybe, so that he can keep poisons extended. And also if those poisons are out, Dark Hail will mean that you won't get crit. That'll help keep him alive if he does miss the sleep, because the sleep is not guaranteed. And I think also, I was talking with Sophia and a couple of others in our mod crew, and we were basically saying stun set on him with Fearsome Presence means you get 5% extra for the sleep, 5% extra for the stun. If he doesn't sleep, he might stun. He'll stun on the A2. He's just going to lock waves down. They won't take a turn. It could even be to the point where it's broken, I'll be honest. It looks really strong. And because it's poisons, he applies his own decreased defense. He can just like run amok. He'll be fine. Really easy. Build him strong. A top tier Void. If you fuse him into Ramantu, you have lost your mind. Just basically, it's crazy. I can't understand how you would do it. It's just, he's too much of a champion to give up. It would be the other way around. If anything, you would empower him over Ramantu. And finally, Mithrala Lifebane. She is not a damage dealer. She is a support-based champion, and you see that in the damage range, but she does still have a little bit in there. Base defense of 1354 is good, not amazing. Huge base speed of 109. We expect these with the unique champions, such as Lydia, Arbiter. Not so much Arbiter because she's not unique, but the champions you get given as rewards for content generally have really high speeds. A1, 2 times defense, A2, 4 times defense. It's a good multiplier, but her base defense lets her down, and also I don't think she has a lot of damage in her book. So she isn't designed to do damage, but she will carry your team. So that brings us to the end of the patch notes. Now, obviously, there is Hydra content that is I'm still working on, and I will obviously do a sort of a part 2 to my Hydra video from a couple of weeks ago, last week. Hopefully I'll get that out to you next week before Christmas. As always, if you've enjoyed the content, please give the video a like, and if you want to see more of this content from us, please subscribe to our channel so that goes straight into your feed. We will be doing some new shows next year, and we will be returning with the podcast in 2022, talking all things raid and all things gaming as things progress. And good luck if you're going for the Christmas fusion, and I'll catch you in the next video.